Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. I'm here today with Dr. Cheryl Green, a lifestyle psychiatrist based in Southern California. She's also the author of the new book, Heal Your Daughter. Today, we're going to talk about cutting in teens and why it's so prevalent. Hi, Dr. Green. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me on, Tarlin.
I'm so glad to have you. So before we talk about our topic at hand, can you just give us a little bit more insight into who you are and what you do?
Yes. Well, my name is Cheryl Green, and I'm actually a lifestyle psychiatrist down in Southern California. I'm based in Redlands, California, which is about 60 miles east of the ocean. So just east of LA. It's close to the Pomona, Claremont area.
Okay.
And so I work part-time at Loma Linda University School of Medicine, where I teach the residents and fellows all about psychiatry and child psychiatry. And I work part-time on my own private practice. So I do online psychiatry anywhere in the state, and I treat all ages, not just teens, but, young adults, and even some geriatric patients.
Okay, wonderful. And what is a lifestyle psychiatrist? I don't know if I've heard that term before.
Okay. Okay. Well, lifestyle psychiatry is a branch of lifestyle medicine. Lifestyle medicine is the newest branch of medicine. It started its board certifications in 2017. And lifestyle medicine is the science of health creation in 6 domains. So nutrition, detox, exercise, sleep, hygiene, social and emotional connectedness, and stress reduction, or the art of relaxation. So that is lifestyle medicine. It's been shown to improve health, reverse diseases, and extend life. Okay, so lifestyle psychiatry is all of that aimed at improving mental health in the form of reducing depression or healing depression, reducing anxiety or healing anxiety, addressing things like trauma through modalities like positive psychology, motivational interviewing that can lead to behavioral changes that will support a healthy mind and a healthy body. So that's kind of what lifestyle psychiatry is. And lifestyle psychiatrists are few and far between, but it is a fast-growing field. It's a fast-growing field. I'd say we have 500 or 600 new board-certified lifestyle medicine docs every year, and of those, a good percentage of each year are psychiatrists. So more and more of us are practicing down here in Southern California, right in Tinseltown and South San Diego.
Very interesting. Okay. So you're probably the perfect person to talk about this topic, cutting in teens and why it's so prevalent. Maybe you can kind of get to the root of it. I haven't really heard much about this topic until lately. I don't know if it's gaining prevalence as far as this phenomenon, cutting in teens, or maybe just self-harm in general. So for those parents that may or may not have some concerns about this, they're just interested in hearing more about it. What is cutting in teens? Like, what does that look like?
Well, first off, cutting in teens has been there, you're right, a long, long time. I knew people in the social group of my own children in the 90s who were cutting and who were chronically suicidal. So I've known that crowd exists for a very long time, but it's reached epidemic proportions, I would say, since maybe the mid-20 teens, like 2015, 16, 17, it's just become epidemic. So I don't know if social media is contributing or not, but it is now epidemic. I run the SHIELD programs at Loma Linda University, and those are groups specifically for cutters. So we have 3 groups of older teens going at all times, and like 1 or 2 groups of tween cutters going at all times. So it's significant enough to have all of those intensive outpatient groups of 8, So I would say 6 or 7 groups of 8 going at all times for treatment. And what it looks like can vary. It depends upon the intensity of it, and it depends upon the gender too. Girls, teen girls who cut, generally, it's quite superficial. It's more like exploratory. You'll see some light marks on the wrist. Sometimes it'll be hidden, it'll be higher up the arm. Sometimes it'll be completely concealed on the thighs or on the abdomen. And sometimes you'll see massive cuts all up and down the arm. That's more rare, but sometimes you'll see cutting, you'll see scars, all ages of cutting. You know, some of the scars will be healed, some will be just light. And on the inpatient unit, you see it all the time. Every single time I'm there on call, you know, I mean, we don't have good numbers on cutting because it is something that most girls conceal. It is not necessarily the overt cry for help that people would think. Not all girls wear it on their sleeve where, you know, you can see, so to speak. A lot of them hide it. It's the deepest, darkest secret they have. So we don't know, we don't have good numbers on it, but on the inpatient unit, at least a third of the teen girls who are there, at least a third, that's conservative, either are actively cutting or have cut in the past, I would say. That's my best guesstimate. It's my
Wow.
best guesstimate. So yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. What it means is
Okay.
another subject entirely.
Yeah. Now you mentioned girls, theirs are more superficial. Are you saying that boys who cut theirs are more serious if they do cut?
You know, I mean, there's no real data on this at all. Again, no data, but I have seen guys who really went at it. It's almost as if they had taken a machete to themselves and all up and down their legs, and they are seriously bleeding, you know. So I think it depends upon who's doing it and what their purpose is, and if it's a genuine suicide attempt versus if it's, you know, something deeper, a manifestation of self-hatred. But that is a good question. Like, what does it mean? I think
Yeah.
it means different things. What I see mainly in the teen girls is the manifestation. What it's saying is not necessarily even a statement to other people. Sometimes it's a statement to oneself. I hate myself is generally the most common message I see it saying is I hate myself. And then sometimes, you know, sometimes if it's visible out here or people tell the mom, then it's a cry for help. But most often in the universal message of it, I think is not only I hate myself, but things like I'm not lovable. No one could love me. I'm defective. I'm damaged goods. I'm not worth anyone's time. That kind of very, very negative, very toxic, internalized message that these girls have gotten from somewhere, because, you know, frankly, little babies, you look at little babies, love themselves. They love themselves. You know, we innately as humans, you know, as they say, self-interest and self-love are molded into our very clay that we're made of because we have to assure our own existence, right? But something has programmed that natural self-love right out of these girls. And there are lots of causes. There's lots of stuff going on in girls' lives. So there are a lot of roots, and then there's the root of the root.
Yeah. So statistically speaking, for the majority of these teens, like what causes them to even want to take whatever self-hatred they have to this level? Like, is it usually triggered from trauma, or did something cause them to feel that they needed to cut in order to feel better? Like what, just to get into their minds, like professionally speaking, from your perspective, like what would you say the majority of the reason?
Well, the ones who reach me are usually the more serious girls with internalized self-hatred. But, you know, there is actually right now, there is somewhat of a craze going on too. So there is like just a contagion element. It is so much out there in the society, so much out there on social media that a lot of girls are cutting like, oh, hey, so-and-so is cutting, my friend is cutting, or it's an entree into a social group. It's like, oh, if I cut too, I can be, you know, part of that group. I need to belong somewhere, so I'll belong with the cutter group. Some of it is social contagion, but that's not as common as you would think. The girls that I see, I think they genuinely haven't internalized that self-hatred. Some of it could be a number of causes. Some of it could be absent parents loss of friends, social isolation, academic failure, use of drugs and feeling isolated and alone and helpless and out of control from that. A multitude of causes. But the root of the root, in my opinion, and what I see time and time again is if you, and of course, as a psychiatrist, you don't want to scratch, you don't want to dig, you want to wait until the girl feels comfortable talking about something. But once they are comfortable with you and they do start opening up, what you find underneath the cutting is oftentimes some sort of boundary violation in the sexual domain, not necessarily full out rape, even just something they were not ready for, something they saw, they witnessed, something where somebody did something and like, what's that? And another common thing is that you wouldn't even know about this actually, unless you're a psychiatrist. But sometimes when girls get to be 11, 12, 13, if they've had an experience as a child, say they were 5 or 6, or even earlier than that, they, at the time something happened, they don't have any vocabulary to talk about that. They don't even know what that is or that that's abnormal at all. They have no way of even processing what happened. But when they get to be 11 or 12 or 13, often they say, oh my gosh, that's what that was. And all of a sudden they realize I was abused as a child. Oh my God, how do I deal with this? I mean, this is something I see over and over and over and over. And then they say, oh, whoever it was, grandpa wasn't so nice, or wow, that stepdad, thank God mom divorced him, or so a lot of it, I would say the root of the root is trauma, and and the root of the root is probably sexual trauma of some type, not necessarily rape.
Yeah.
It could be somebody lurked there, somebody revealed themselves, somebody said something, somebody made lewd comments, it could be anything. And sometimes, of course, it's very dark, like you see that all the time too. Like mom sold me out until I was 5, whatever.
Yeah.
You see that. It's rare, but I've seen it several times, in the last 6 years or so. And it seems like that's getting more and more common. That is a thing, by the way. It is a thing. Pedophilia is a thing. And there's a movie about it that's out right now called The Sound of Freedom. In my opinion, that's mild. And maybe it's because I live and work in San Bernardino County, which is one of the meccas for child trafficking. But I've had many, many patients who were not just abused as kids, they were actually trafficked. And that's a whole crime they don't even know is a crime while it's occurring. Little kids, they don't know anything. They don't know what's happening. They look to adults as if they're gods. They have no idea what's going on. And sometimes they love whoever's there. They have Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
So they don't know what's
that's
happening.
Horrible to even think about.
So we treat it. We give support. We throw those kids a lifeline. We give them a sense of what's normal. Actually, that kind of is normal for this area. For normative. The normative right now is not what's truly normal based on normal history of civilization, because one of the main things civilization put a stop to was just that kind of exploitation of children. And, civilization meant the uplifting of women and the respect of women and of their natural, protection of the children and of the fathers, allowing them to protect and nurture a family with their own children and raise them up safely. That's what civilization is supposed to do, right? But now it's almost as if civilization is being turned on its head by these vast crime syndicates.
It's terrible. But getting back to the trauma of it and why a teen would cut themselves. So how are they feeling better? Like what type of release are they getting when they cut themselves? Because they're actually hurting themselves physically, but maybe mentally or emotionally, they're feeling better. Like what does that look like?
There has been speculation about that. I don't think we know definitively, but the pain fibers, it's almost as if you can emotional pain and the pain receptors in our body, they tend to end up in the same place in the brain. So when you're having a lot of emotional pain and you cut yourself, it's almost as if it changes the subject in the brain. You can literally get away from the emotional pain. If you have physical pain, it like overrides the emotional pain. It gives some center of relief. What most girls I knew who've carried cutting to an actual addiction, once it's an actual addiction, it's because they are getting a relief from their emotional pain. But the problem with that, and there is a huge problem with that, is that we now know that cutting predisposes you to actually die by suicide. So sorry, this is such a dark topic,
Oh
Carolyn.
no, this is good. You're saying this. Yeah, I'm glad you're bringing this up.
It makes completed suicide 10 times more likely. So like they looked at people who successfully, it's a dubious term to use, I know, successfully, but successfully completed suicide versus a group equally depressed, as many hospitalizations, as many diagnoses, blah, blah, blah. Compare the two groups. The one thing that the completed suicides looking back had in common is that they were cutters. The cutting made it tenfold more likely that you would die by suicide.
Wow.
So scientists have deduced from that the cutting acts as a kind of rehearsal in the brain. So little stress over here, cutting over here, little stress, cut, little stress, cut. You're conditioning the brain, little stress, cut, so that when you hit eventually, as we all do, a big stress, child dies, divorce, job loss, whatever, economic, you're suddenly homeless, whatever. When you hit a bigger stress, that's when people tend to just end it. They have those pathways in the brain going, injure myself, injure myself, injure myself. And the ante keeps rising as the stresses rise, and they finally just do. Once you've conditioned your brain in that way, it's very hard to get out of that thought that, oh, the solution is. And so, yeah, it's quite dangerous.
Yeah.
So what we do at Loma Linda, and certainly in my private practice, when coping is like that, when it's an addiction or when it's a coping skill, when it is a coping skill, it's the most maladaptive coping skill you could ever. First, we educate girls, this is a maladaptive coping skill. It will end nowhere good for you. There is no good end to this. And sometimes the scars don't even heal. Your kids will see those, your grandkids will see those.
Yeah.
We educate them. We say, this is very common now. It's normative, but it's bad for you. There are better coping skills, way better coping skills. There are coping skills out there that actually reduce your chances of dying by suicide, such as, we know the best one, emotional connectedness. So if there is that person in the family, maybe it's a long lost aunt or a cousin or a, who knows, grandmother, who knows, your uncle, it could be anyone, someone you genuinely love who loves you back. There needs to be that genuine thread of the relationship has to be real, and it has to be true, and it has to be based on love and caring, because you can't fake a healing. It has to come from, you are valued. I value you. It's something you feel very deeply. And so when you can connect a girl who feels like she's worthless and unlovable to someone who actually does love her and care about her, and she feels it, knows it, realizes it, that is a great healing thing. Or to others like herself. One of the great things about these groups of 8, they're 6 to 8 other people in the group, they feel the same way you do. Many of them bond, and they realize, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who feels this. I'm not a weirdo. There's nothing particularly unique about this problem. Everybody who went through what I went through feels this way about themselves, and there's a cure. And you see that, and it's amazing that by the end of the 8 to 10 weeks, these are intensive outpatient programs, 3 times a week, 3 hours a session. So it's like 9 hours of therapy a week. You'd think, who needs that? But they need that. They need that. The traumatized girls need that, who are cutting. So 9 hours a week for 8 to 10 weeks, by the end of that, it's absolutely amazing. It's amazing how girls can look back and say, oh yeah, that happened. It was horrible. It was traumatizing, but I'm bigger than that. And there are people who cared about, and that was a crime. That was not me being bad. That was not me doing something. Or if I did do something, maybe that was because I didn't know what it was I was even doing. My motive was never to be evil. They can come to these realizations and begin to heal all the shame, heal all the guilt, heal all the anger and all the confusion. Like, why did that happen? Maybe because the end of confusion is usually self-blame. It's like, why did that happen? Oh, it was me. I did something bad. So we train the girls, we try to condition them the opposite way. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You are a fine young person. You have a bright future. You do not have to let this affect you forever. You can heal. And so many of them realize not only that they're loved by a family member, but by whole groups of other girls, by mental health professionals who really care about them, So
Yeah.
it's a wonderful process, honestly.
Yeah. So, Dr. Green, that's really good information. But for those parents who are listening, maybe they have a daughter who's started cutting, maybe even socially. Maybe they haven't experienced the trauma. Maybe it's just been a couple of times, but the mom is worried about it. Like, how would they know if it's something where, maybe, I don't know if talk therapy is needed or a home, or I don't know if there's a spectrum of cutting. But how would that parent know if this is something maybe mild, maybe their daughter's done it a couple of times versus something more serious where they have to go to the outpatient treatment, like you mentioned? Like, is there a spectrum for
Yeah,
this
that
or?
is a great question. And there is a spectrum. Yeah, and that is a great point. Lifestyle psychiatry is never to replace or displace psychiatry as usual, not at all. I mean, it can't replace those inpatient units. It can't replace those big, long programs. It can't replace weekly therapy, but it does add an extra dimension because those systems are all so overwhelmed. There aren't enough hospital beds. There aren't enough therapists. There aren't enough child adolescent psychiatrists. Maybe we have 7,000. We need like 40,000 child and
Yeah.
adolescent psychiatrists. It's that extra dimension of what you can do at home to detect and also to provide that additional layer of support and to to detect and to provide that extra layer of support. Because ultimately, they're going to be done with the mental health system and they're come right back home. And then if you're trained, you know what to do. You've got them. But I'll answer your question. The first thing is to make sure you have a bond with that kid that's going to be there, and so that you can honestly communicate. So what is a relationship? Open and honest communication is the relationship. That is the relationship. That, I would say, that defines the relationship. Open and honest communication. So if you can really communicate with that kid, open the doorway to communication. I see a cut. Can you tell me what it's about? Can you tell me, is it more like, what is your purpose? Are you trying to fit in? And just ask them point blank, have you had suicidal thoughts? Have you had suicidal thoughts? Is this a suicide attempt? Because sometimes the cutting actually is a suicide attempt. Sometimes, and I won't even say the ways on there, but there are ways of turning that cutting into a suicide attempt. There are definitely ways that are easily searchable. So, I mean, you can ask them, is this a suicide? Now, if it is, the place to go is the nearest emergency room. If it's not, it's social contagion, you could maybe just check them in with a therapist and, definitely see a therapist about that. And there are urgent care clinics. There are things like that where you can go just to have them evaluated, to see what level of care. This is a key concept in psychiatry, level of care, because we have so many in psychiatry. In the rest of medicine, it's inpatient or outpatient, but in psychiatry, we have all these levels of care. We have inpatient psychiatry where they go spend a week on the adolescent inpatient unit. And the main benefit of that is the locked door. They cannot hurt themselves, but they also have groups all day. Then they have what's called the partial hospitalization program, which is 9 to 3 for 2 weeks. Then they have these intensive outpatient programs that are generally 9 hours a week, three 3 meetings 3 times a week for 8 to 10 weeks. That's another level. And then there's just the outpatient level. There's therapy, there's psychiatry, there's a combination of the two. Therapy to be effective really needs to be no more than every 2 weeks out. So like going once a month isn't going to be really adequate because you're just playing catch up. You can't go deep if it's once a month therapy, honestly. But if you have weekly therapy, that is ideal for most teens, weekly therapy, with or without psychiatric medications. Now, the point of lifestyle psychiatry is that it adds this extra dimension where parents really know what they're doing. They can often kind of provide that incredible health in those 6 domains I mentioned. And they can often get kids off of the psychiatric medication so that they don't need to be on it as long or as high a dose, that kind of thing. And my goal actually is to treat and reverse the depression enough that the kids no longer need the psychiatric medications, because I certainly wouldn't want anyone to be on psychiatric medications for the rest of their life. I mean, they have side effects. Sometimes SSRIs, for example, are known to increase suicidal thoughts. And this is not a trivial side effect. This is this is almost a paradoxical, or it makes it odd that they would even be on an SSRI. That is the standard of care in the field. And yet, as soon as they can safely come off, I try to recommend that my patients who can come off do come off those medications.
Mm-hmm. And just to summarize for those who are listening, so let's say the parent talks to the child, they say they're not suicidal, maybe they were just trying to fit in, so they did it a few times. Now, is that something that the parent should just dismiss, or should they still seek some sort of therapy, even though the child is saying, oh, I don't want to do it again? Like, what do you think at that level?
Yeah, at that level, there's the proverbial, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. I've noticed just over years that if you're dragging a kid to therapy who doesn't want to be there, they're just going to sit there. Nothing's going to happen. So I think, if your teen wants to talk to a professional and goes a few times, benefits, then I would say go to it. If they hate it, if they have to be dragged there by their heels, I think they're really not going to benefit. So you could give it a try, talk to them, see if they're up to it. The only emergency is, the definition of needing inpatient hospitalization is critical. If they are having suicidal thoughts with a plan, that means take them to the ER. But short of that, if they're not suicidal with a plan, you have to kind of negotiate these things. You have to say, well, okay, it's not an emergency. You're not going to do anything so drastic, that it's going to be life-threatening. So then you just negotiate with them. Hopefully you can convince them to go to therapy. Ask them to give it a whirl.
Yeah. And just to clarify, as far as therapy, would you consider therapy to be like a counselor or a psychologist versus a psychiatrist? Like, how would you define therapy versus seeing a psychiatrist?
Well, psychiatrists tend to give medications and refer to a therapist for any of the psychiatric. And it's just because our current medical model doesn't really allow for anything. You go through umpteen years of training to get to be a psychiatrist through medical school and then residency and then fellowship. And it's so many years that by the time you are working and you have to pay back all of those loans, you have to charge more. So like what psychiatrists do these days, they generally shrink the appointments. You're seeing that psychiatrist 10 or 15 minutes, but then you see the psychologist who has been presumably through maybe, not quite the whole, I guess it's somewhat less, maybe 6 or 7 years less education to get to that point. So they are able to charge less.
Okay. And as we wind down the conversation, can you just really quickly let us know, aside from the obvious cutting marks, are there any other signs that a parent can look out for to see if their child is self-harming themselves? Or is it mainly just the marks that they would see?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. There are so many warning signs. Yeah, the marks are one warning sign. isolating in the room. Of course, all teens do that a little bit, but doing that to the exclusion of wanting to come out. Not getting out of bed at all, like the duvet over the head sign. In melting down, sudden academic failure, suddenly going on drugs, suddenly on the phone. You should periodically search your teen's phone, finding suicidal texts to friends, having other friends' mothers call you. So and so told me so and so. Suicidal thoughts, and most importantly, look in the browser, the history, and make sure that they're not Googling ways to die, ways to commit suicide.
Yeah.
So cutting is one side, but the whole question of suicidality is another. And you've got to keep that foremost. Always suicidality is the number one concern and fear that we have. And if that's going on, you either try to get your kid, you drive them to the ER, or you call 911. If something really dangerous is happening, you have a very low threshold for calling 911.
Yeah.
So those are some of the warning signs.
Okay.
Not just the cutting.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. This is such valuable information, Dr. Green. Now,
thank you so much.
Yeah. Where can people find you if they want to know more about you? And can you just briefly tell us about your new book?
Oh, yes. I have a book. It's geared toward parents. It's called Heal Your Daughter, How Lifestyle Psychiatry Can Save Her from Depression, Cutting, and Suicidal Thoughts. And it's really, though, it's all about lifestyle psychiatry, what it is and how it can be employed to help depression. And this book, the contents of it work on teen boys. It works on adults for that matter, with just a few tweaks. Like adults need less of the exercise, about half as much. But it's lifestyle psychiatry. It works for everybody. It's pretty much the same. This is specifically geared at teen girls. And then I also have a workbook, the Heal Your Daughter workbook, where a parent or caregiver, it could be grandma, uncle, whoever it is who's caring for that kid, can work through the book, and they can, write on it, rip it up, tear out pages, Xerox, whatever. They can work together through the book, and the book, the Heal Your Daughter, kind of explains to parents the importance of these 6 domains, why they're important. Then the workbook is actually working it out, figuring out a way with your kid to make it work. Like the whole food plant-based diet. Oh no, how would I implement that? Well, you start with, what does your kid like already? That I can go and bring home for them, So those are the 2 books that Heal Your Daughter, and then the Heal Your Daughter workbook. And my name is a very common name. Cheryl Green is so common. So to get it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, you really have to say Cheryl L. Green, MD. Otherwise, all kinds of Cheryl Greens pop up.
Yeah.
So it's CHERYLLGREEN, just like the color, MD. And that's also, you can also find it on my website. I'm at https://CherylLGreenMD.com. So CHERYLLGREENMD.com.
Hey moms, thanks for listening today. If you enjoy this show, I would love to hear from you by way of an encouraging review. This podcast is meant to be a blessing to mothers, so I appreciate any support for this platform. Until next time.